Hey, Tammy Davis, thank you for joining me today. And I have a couple of things to say before getting into anything. First, I want to thank you if you are a subscriber. You joining me on this journey is very special to me. So really thank you for being here. Secondly, I want to apologize for posting 2 videos back to back. I don't ordinarily do that. However, I've just come back from a walk and was kind of going over some thoughts about a particular client of mine that I was recently honored to begin working with, a 14-year-old bedwetter who stutters. And unfortunately, I work with a number of children of varying ages that have gone, young children into their teens that are bedwetters. But in this particular individual's case, as a stutterer, he's been doing this since he was very little. So as I go with anyone, it's always important for me to understand the mechanism behind every single concern an individual has. Or not just specifically an individual, but just look at the mechanisms of a particular condition. I'll just say it that way. And in the case of stuttering, what I found was a study that was done by researchers who were able to activate the stuttering reaction through exciting some dopamine receptors in the brain, which then caused obviously a ripple effect. However, nonetheless, this is what occurred. And so it just struck me as very intriguing to see dopamine indicated one more time. And after doing a video yesterday on estrogen and dopamine and commenting about dopamine being a signaling molecule and it is what's responsible for initiating the stress response, I thought I would talk about it again today in a little bit different aspect. So before going any further, allow me to list a few more health conditions. Autism, high blood pressure, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, addiction, ADHD, depression, schizophrenia. I could go on, but I think I'm going to just stop there. The point of that is that each one of them is linked to dopamine. Dopamine is indicated in all of them, as is acetylcholine. Now, the significance to that is the fact that acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter of the autonomic nervous system. It is what activates it, and it is the final chemical that's released by the parasympathetic nervous system when the reactions calm down. But nonetheless, it is the stress response, the two of them. I got something in my eye. Can only imagine what that looked like on your end. Anyway, so like I said, these two chemicals are indicated in those health conditions as well as in the stress response. And so basically, I'm not here to say that all of these health conditions are the same and that they all need to be treated identically. I'm not saying that at all. They are, for the most part, unique all unto themselves. They each have their own classification of primary symptoms. And at the same time, the chemistry involved is identical. And you have to treat the individual, obviously, as I've talked about before. But again, the reason for this is stress response. If you think about stuttering, like I said, and somebody gets anxious, they will oftentimes stutter if they're really excited about something. My oldest son was a stutterer for the longest time. Now, he was born during a time where they really weren't testing very much for autism, but based on his behavior, he clearly would demonstrate something on the spectrum. I have another one who was wasn't diagnosed. They tried to get him diagnosed for ADHD, but I wouldn't go for it in the way of medicine. We did other things. I did other things for my older son too. Yet the reason why all of this is such a big deal to me, besides being exciting to understand all of this and to make a difference in the lives of our children, because the truth is, when we look at it, if I look at the full scope and I can look at my life and my personal life in two different ways. I can see it as disappointing and frightening, or I can look at it as motivation. And that's pretty much what I've done with it. Because the truth is that besides addiction and depression and these other conditions that I mentioned to you, There's also Parkinson's and Alzheimer's in my family. And if we just, pull it all back to the stress response and how I've talked about this before in other videos and even in the things that I write, we are reacting to our environment, and the body is consistently under pressure. It's almost like it senses a threat at all times, given the type of world that we live in. Therefore, the stress response is consistently activated. There is no relief happening. And so therefore, stress management is key for all of these. A really interesting fact that I want to point out here, because I did mention high blood pressure, and I did also mention ADHD. And if you are a parent with a child that was diagnosed with ADHD, or you've been using medications, you probably have heard the concerns that the medications for ADHD, some of them can actually lead to heart trouble. High blood pressure may be one that you may be surprised to hear that's involved in this, but let me just kind of point this out a little bit. So when the stress response is activated, we already recognize that heart rate goes up, right? If you are scared of something, the heart rate goes up, respiration increases, we can begin to perspire more. I'm pretty familiar with what happens when that's going on. And eventually that does subside to a degree. It may not be that we are panting and, sweating profusely, and at the same time there's still a lot of it going on in the background that we're not aware of. We breathe very shallowly. This is part of the reason why physical activity is highly encouraged. This is the reason why slow deep breaths in yoga, is just really beneficial, because it reminds the autonomic nervous system to relax. At any case, when the stress response is activated, the angiotensin 2 receptor is also activated. That is the hormone that's often indicated in high blood pressure. Now, we do have, the last count I got was 68 different high blood pressure medications. There's 11 categories. And so angiotensin isn't always being addressed, but when that receptor is activated, it actually deactivates another gene that is used in the breakdown metabolism of gluten and casein. And I think about the number of children that are being put on gluten-free, casein-free diets. That does include those ADHD, that does include autism. I know Down syndrome people that have been placed on these diets. I mean, besides that, you don't even have to have any of those diagnoses to go gluten-free. Gluten-free is a big thing these days, and a lot of people do have sensitivity to it, but it makes sense. If you're not breaking it down, you have larger particles floating throughout the body, and the body can't recognize it for what it is. Therefore, it activates an immune reaction, and now you have a food sensitivity, or you have a sensitivity to wheat or dairy. And so the ripple effect continues on, much like stuttering. They activate the dopamine receptors, and there's a ripple effect of other chemicals being involved. And so this is the reason why they are all linked. And again, even though each one of them can be and should be being addressed per the individual presenting the case, at the same time, it's imperative that we begin to address the stress response. Stress management at the cell level is absolutely necessary here. There's ways to do that through nutrition, and unfortunately, nutrition isn't enough. The reason for that is, as I've talked about before, as long as the body is still responding to the environment, it's not using the nutrients properly. You want to work on your digestive system, absolutely. That's a huge factor. I've taught digestive wellness, and even though I work with countless children. I probably looked a little shocked there. I do. I work with countless children. I work with autism. I worked with all manner of mental health, and I have a number of kids right now. And it breaks my heart to know that our children are coming into this world and they're being handed to us with these conditions already going on. In the Amish communities, I get countless phone calls from the parents telling me that their children have hiatal hernias, when in fact, when they get into describing it, it's pretty much just histamine issues and bloating and indigestion in 5 and 6-year-olds. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so really getting control of the digestive system, strengthening the digestive system, improving the body's response to stress at the cellular level. This is where stress management comes in. And so that's really kind of what I wanted to say here, is that even though we have an array of health conditions, the chemistry involved is indicative of a stress reaction occurring. And when we can step back from the immediate fear about what's happening to the individual that we love and recognize that the environment and whatever other stress factors, and keep in mind, this started prior to, this started in utero. Nobody was born under chronic stress at this point. And I've written about this also, that we recognize that the brain changes, the structure of the brain is altered in addiction. And of course, dopamine is indicated there. And at the same time, how do we know that this didn't occur in utero? Why are we pinning this on chemicals that the user has been partaking in? I didn't want to use the same word over and over again. So how do we know that? How do we know that it's not a result of the additives that there, or how do we know that it's just not cortisol? If you haven't seen anything before, if you haven't read anything of mine, let me just say it here. Cortisol, as you know, is the stress hormone. Okay, so that is what's released once the, dopamine and acetylcholine start all of this activity. Cortisol is now released. Cortisol actually is known to alter the brain and increase the amount of dopamine receptors, therefore needing more dopamine in the brain. So the theory that people are addicted to stress is actually real. And how do we know that with the environmental impact that's going on right now, through our lifestyle, through the air that we breathe and the water that we drink and the body care products and so forth, how do we know that that is not stimulating the body to do something to protect it, to protect you? And that, in fact, cortisol is actually making all of these changes from the very beginning. So therefore, finding ways to, I guess you want to say, not only deactivate the stress response, help reduce the cortisol load. Many of you that I've talked with here are familiar with ashwagandha. Holy basil is another one. These two herbs, you don't want to do the oil of holy basil. That one you got to be real careful of, because it does have blood thinning qualities. So I'm not suggesting holy basil as an oil, because it's not indicated with all medications. Ashwagandha is very beneficial, although I would remind you that you want to make sure of your source. I recently got notification from several study groups that are finding that here in the United States, ashwagandha is becoming so popular and so highly sought after and marketed that there are companies out there that are not providing you with the full root. They're actually cutting it to keep the price at a reasonable rate. They're blending it with leaves of other plants, and so it's adulterated, is how I want to say it. The same thing happens with essential oils. This is the reason why knowing your source is wise, knowing what you're trying to do with your system. So at that rate, like I said, these two particular herbs are very good as adaptogens. Rhodiola root is also another good one. But again, you want to double check what you're doing if you are taking medications in combination with those particular herbs. There's also, like I said, you can do things nutritionally that would begin to ease that, primarily with foods as opposed to supplements, because I can tell you straight up that there's a lot of minerals and vitamins that are indicated or not indicated, or how do I want to say that? Indicated to cause interactions with a lot of medications. I'm always amazed at the number of interactions, known interactions, and known interactions are not the only interactions, because your body may have its own interaction. So caution with your supplements. So anyway, I'm getting off on another tangent. The whole point here is that the stress response is activated. And so what do we do for these kids that are needing to live on gluten-free, casein-free diets? At this point, until you actually find a protocol or get onto a program or onto a protocol that begins to alleviate the stress response, working with that individual, you want to stick with the diet. You want to stick with foods that you feel or they feel good eating. You don't want to. My words of encouragement are, don't just go off of the foods that are recommended, because again, everybody is going to react differently. I was talking with somebody about this the other day with regards to histamine. You know, you can go out on the internet and you can find countless lists of foods that are high in histamine and recommendations of what not to eat. You can find a lot of information out there on just about everything. And my suggestion is just to work with the system. However, in the case of these children, like I said, or for that matter, anyone who is living with these health conditions, managing the stress response is imperative. If medications are involved, then helping the body establish a balance to where that stress response can be deactivated, because medications are a form of control. And I'm not bad-mouthing medications at this point. I'm just merely making a statement that they are targeted mechanisms for controlling the body. And for that reason, helping the system restore some degree of balance, some sense of ease, is essential. That will actually begin to relieve the stress response. But how do you do that depends on the individual. So at any rate, like I said, I can go on and on and on about this, and I just really appreciate you joining me on this journey again, and know that there's a lot of health conditions that if you actually look into the neurochemistry of it, you'll see that these neurotransmitters are indicated. And you know, it's funny, if you look up a neurotransmitter and you look at health conditions that are linked to that neurotransmitter or an imbalance with that neurotransmitter, I just want to point this out. If there's an imbalance with one, there's an imbalance with all of them, okay? You can't have low dopamine and normal serotonin levels. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's essentially impossible unless you're leaking dopamine out of your brain and, you know, out of your body. And it's just, you know, the system is phenomenal in the sense that it's constantly seeking, our body is basically in the pursuit of homeostasis. That's all it's trying to do. It's constantly adjusting itself to maintain balance. Therefore, if you've got one chemical out of balance, you're going to have another one that's out of balance. That doesn't mean that one is good and one is bad. It just means it is what it is, okay? And so if you have high dopamine levels and low serotonin levels, you're going to have an array of potential health concerns that are involved with that. What I'm trying to say is they counterbalance one another, okay? It doesn't mean that one's normal and one's not. It just means the whole system is juggling itself, and where your cards fall is where they fall, and that's exactly how it's going to manifest. And we do have some idea on where these imbalances lead into. So anyway, I hope you guys are having a good day wherever you are, and invite you to ask me any questions that you may have. And thanks again for watching, and I will talk with you later. Bye.